The Memphis night pulsed with life, the neon lights of Beale Street casting a kaleidoscope of blue and red across the cobblestones. The air was thick with the smoky scent of barbecue, the briny tang of the Mississippi River, and the soulful wail of a saxophone spilling from a nearby blues club. On the rooftop of the Ashford Lux Hotel, Blakely St. Clair stood like a flame against the skyline, her red silk dress hugging her curves, the fabric whispering against her rich mahogany skin. Her dreadlocks, woven with tiny silver beads, caught the neon's glow, framing her sharp cheekbones and deep brown eyes that burned with defiance. The saxophone's mournful notes curled around her, blending with the distant churn of the river as she faced the man who'd set her world ablaze. Dylan Ashford. He was too close, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a slice of tanned chest that rose with each steady breath. His dark brown hair was tousled, kissed by the river breeze, and his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. The blues riff soared a sultry backdrop to the heat between them. Dylan's hand found her waist, his fingers firm through the silk, pulling her against him. His breath grazed her neck, a mix of bourbon and cedar cologne that sent a shiver down her spine. "I need you, St. Clair," he murmured, his voice low and rough, like the Mississippi's current on a stormy night. Her hands pressed against his shoulders, feeling the taut muscle beneath his shirt. The world shrank to the neon flickering across his jaw, the saxophone's wail syncing with her heartbeat, the way his lips hovered inches from hers. When he kissed her, it was a wildfire, fierce, consuming, stealing her breath. His tongue brushed hers, a spark that ignited her veins. Her fingers tightened on his shirt, the silk of her dress sliding against her skin as she arched into him, the river's rhythm pulsing with their own. The blues hit a crescendo, the neon flashing like a heartbeat. But fear surged in her chest, sharp and cold. She pushed him back, her breath ragged, her eyes blazing with want and doubt. "This ain't my game, Ashford," she whispered, her voice trembling, thick with her gullah roots. "I don't play with fire. I can't control." His gaze softened, but his hand stayed warm on her waist, grounding her. "You're not alone in this, Blakely." He said her name, a promise on his lips. "Let me prove it." The rooftop faded, the neon dimming as the story rewound to a week earlier, to the moment that sparked this blaze. Blakely St. Clair was no stranger to the weight of truth. At 28, she carried the fire of her Gullah ancestors, whose stories of resilience and rebellion echoed in her blood. Raised in a tight-knit community along the Carolina coast, she'd learned to weave sweetgrass baskets before she could write to sing blues, before she could speak of pain. Now, as a star investigative reporter for the Memphis Tribune, she was known for exposing the dirty secrets of the South's elite politicians. Moguls, anyone who thought their money could bury the truth. Her dreadlocks, her sharp tongue, her unapologetic swagger. They were her armor, but beneath it, she hid scars from a love that had burned her raw mark. Her ex had promised forever, then sold her out for a payout, leaving her to question if trust was just another lie. The Ashford Lux Hotel was her latest battleground. Its grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, white silk tablecloths, and champagne flutes that caught the light like diamonds. Memphis's elite investors, journalists, and business tycoons gathered for the annual Ashford Lux press conference, a stage for Dylan Ashford, the CEO whose name was synonymous with power and precision. Blakely stood out in the crowd, her red silk dress, a bold contrast to the muted blacks and grays of her fellow reporters. Her brown eyes glinted with mischief, her lips curved in a knowing smile. She wasn't here to write fluff pieces about billionaire success. Secrets. She was here to uncover what Dylan Ashford was hiding. The stage lights flared and Dylan stepped forward, his black suit tailored to perfection, not a crease in sight. His dark brown hair was swept back, his gray-blue eyes scanning the room with a cool, calculated calm. He spoke with the confidence of a man who owned every inch of the world he walked on, answering questions about expansion plans and luxury branding with practiced ease. Blakely watched her pen tapping her notepad, reading the subtle tension in his jaw. He hated this, the press, the scrutiny, the risk of his pristine image cracking. She'd heard the rumors, a scandal years ago, a lover who'd sold his secrets to the tabloids. Dylan Ashford didn't trust reporters, and Blakely was about to test just how deep that distrust ran. When the floor opened for questions, she raised her hand, her voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her gullah accent threading through her words. "If you hate the press so much, why throw this dog and pony show?" "What are you hiding?" The room stilled, heads turning. Dylan's eyes locked onto hers, a flicker of surprise giving way to amusement. "I don't hate the press, Ms. St. Clair," he said, his voice deep, steady, her name rolling off his tongue like a challenge. "I hate lazy reporting that twists the truth. You planning to write that kind or something worth reading?" A ripple of laughter broke the tension, but Blakely didn't flinch. She smiled, slow and sharp. "Oh, I only write the truth. Ashford. Hope you're ready for it." The crowd buzzed, but for Blakely and Dylan, the game had begun. After the conference, she lingered at the rooftop bar, the neon of Beale Street painting the night in electric hues. The blues band wailed the saxophone's notes, weaving through the chatter of journalists and investors. She sipped a bourbon, the burn grounding her when a shadow fell across her table. "Mind if I join you?" Dylan asked, sliding into the seat opposite her without waiting for an answer. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie loosened, and his gray-blue eyes glinted with a mix of curiosity and challenge. Blakely raised a brow, swirling her drink. "You always this bold? Or is it just the whiskey talking?" He chuckled, leaning back, his gaze never leaving hers. "Takes more than whiskey to shake me, St. Clair. But you're something else. Most reporters would have backed off after that question. Most reporters ain't me." She shot back, her smile teasing, but her eyes sharp. "So what's the deal, Ashford? You here to charm me or shut me up?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping low, a velvet edge to it. "Maybe I just want to know what makes a woman like you tick. You're not afraid of me, are you?" She laughed, the sound rich and unapologetic. "Afraid, honey? I eat guys like you for breakfast." The bourbon flowed, the blues pulsed, and their banter sharpened, each word a jab, each smile a parry. Blakely teased his boring suits. Dylan countered with her reckless reporting. The night blurred, one drink turning to 3, then 5, and somewhere between the laughter and the saxophone's wail, the line between rivals and something more dissolved. They ended up in his suite, the city lights spilling through the windows, the air heavy with bourbon and desire. His hands gripped her waist, her dress pooling on the floor, their kisses a storm of heat and need. The neon flickered outside the blues, a heartbeat. And for one night, Blakely let herself burn. But dawn brought clarity and panic. Blakely woke in a bed too soft, the scent of cedar and sandalwood clinging to the sheets. Dylan slept beside her, his bare chest rising slow, a sheet draped low on his hips. Her head throbbed, memories of his lips, his hands flashing like neon. Oh, hell no, she thought, heart racing. She wasn't the type to freak out over a one-night stand, but Dylan Ashford was trouble billionaire, trouble the kind that could torch her career. She slipped into her dress, grabbed her heels, and scribbled a note. "Thanks for the fun night. Don't call." She left before he stirred the door, clicking shut behind her. Dylan woke to an empty bed, the note mocking him from the pillow. "Thanks for the fun night." 8 words, sharp and dismissive. He leaned back, a smirk tugging at his lips, irritation mixing with amusement. Women didn't walk out on Dylan Ashford. He was the one who set the terms, who ended things, But Blakely St. Clair wasn't just any woman. She was a wildfire, and he was already hooked. He crumpled the note, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can run, St. Clair," he muttered. Game on, back at the Tribune newsroom. Blakely nursed a coffee, her head pounding. Nia Brooks, her best friend and a blues singer, leaned over her desk, eyes gleaming. "Girl, you vanished after that press conference. Don't tell me nothing happened." Blakely cut her off, her voice firm, but her cheeks warmed. Nia raised a brow, unconvinced. "Uh-huh. Then why you got that?" "I just slept with a billionaire." Glow. Blakely nearly choked. "Shut up, Nia." It was a mistake. Ain't happening again. But trouble had a way of finding her. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You can't run that easy. St. Clair. I'm outside your place. Dylan." Her heart skipped a mix of annoyance and thrill. She glanced out the window, picturing him leaning against his car, that damn smirk on his face. 2 hours he waited the Memphis night cold, and when she finally pulled up, he was still there, hands in his pockets, eyes glinting like the river under moonlight. "What the hell you doing here, Ashford?" she asked, stepping out, her voice sharp, but her pulse racing. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You left," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I don't like losing, St. Clair. Not when the game's just started." She crossed her arms, her smile teasing but her eyes wary. "This ain't a game I play, Ashford. You're trouble and I got enough of that." He leaned in, his voice low, a challenge wrapped in velvet. "Maybe I'm the kind of trouble you need." The river murmured. The blues echoed from Beale Street, and Blakely felt the spark ignite again. She could walk away, keep her walls up, but something in his eyes, hunger, curiosity, maybe even truth, made her pause. The game was on, and whether she'd win or burn, she was already in too deep. Will Blakely play Dylan's game, or shut him down? Drop fire in the comments if you're rooting for her, and hit that subscribe button to join our Soul Stories family. Stay tuned for the next chapter of this red-hot romance. The Charleston night hummed with the rhythm of the low country, the air thick with the briny scent of the harbor and the sweet earthy aroma of sweetgrass baskets sold along the cobblestone streets. In a dimly lit blues club on King Street, the golden glow of lanterns spilled across worn wooden tables, and the wail of a trumpet wove through the crowd's murmurs. Blakely St. Clair leaned against the bar, her black linen dress clinging to her curves, the silver beads in her dreadlocks catching the light like stars. Her deep brown eyes glinted with a mix of defiance and unease, her fingers tracing the rim of a bourbon glass. The blues pulsed a sultry heartbeat, but her mind was elsewhere, on a rooftop in Memphis, on a man whose kiss had burned her to the core. Dylan Ashford. She'd left him standing outside her apartment a week ago, his gray-blue eyes daring her to play his game. That night on the Ashford Lux rooftop under Memphis's neon glow had been a mistake, a bourbon-fueled blur of heat and want that ended with her sneaking out at dawn, leaving a note to keep him at bay. But Dylan wasn't the kind to back off. He'd waited 2 hours in the cold, his smirk a challenge, his words a hook. "You can't run that easy, St. Clair." Blakely had shut him down, determined to keep her walls up, but the spark he'd ignited refused to die. Now in Charleston, chasing a lead on a shady Ashford Lux deal, she felt his shadow looming closer than the Mississippi's tide. The club was alive, locals and tourists swaying to the music, the air heavy with sweat and soul. Blakely was here to meet Nia Brooks, her best friend and a blues singer whose voice could make the devil weep. Nia's set was about to start, but Blakely's thoughts kept drifting to Dylan, to the way his hands had felt on her waist, to the danger of letting him in. She sipped her bourbon, the burn grounding her, when a familiar voice cut through the music like a blade. "Running from me already, St. Clair." She turned, her heart skipping. Dylan stood there, his white shirt rolled up to the elbows, his dark brown hair tousled by the harbor breeze, his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers, a slow, dangerous smile curving his lips. The lantern light caught the sharp angles of his jaw, and the scent of cedar cologne mixed with the club's smoky air, pulling her back to that Memphis night. "Damn, Ashford," she said, her voice cool, but her pulse racing. "You got a tracker on me or what?" He chuckled, sliding onto the bar stool beside her, his knee brushing hers just enough to send a spark through her. "Just luck," he said, his voice low, teasing, "or maybe it's fate." She raised a brow, her smile sharp. "Fate, boy, you sound like a bad romance novel. What you doing in Charleston?" He leaned closer, his gaze never wavering. "Business, and maybe looking for a certain reporter who thinks she can ghost me." Blakely laughed, the sound rich with her gullah cadence, but her stomach twisted. She'd come to Charleston to dig into whispers of a land deal tied to Ashford Lux, a deal that smelled like corruption. Seeing Dylan here wasn't just a coincidence, it was a complication. Before she could fire back, the band struck up a new song, and Nia took the stage, her voice a velvet wave that silenced the crowd. Blakely turned to watch, grateful for the distraction, but Dylan's presence was a heat she couldn't ignore. Nia's blues filled the club, her lyrics raw with pain and hope, and Blakely felt the music tug at her own scars. She'd trusted Mark once, loved him until he sold her out for a bribe, leaving her to rebuild alone. Dylan was different, sharper, more dangerous, but the risk felt too familiar. She glanced at him, catching his eyes on her, not the stage, his gaze soft but intense, like he saw through her armor. "Dance with me," he said, standing, his hand extended a challenge wrapped in velvet. She hesitated, her heart thudding. The last time she'd let him close, she'd lost control, but the blues pulsed Nia's voice, urging her to feel, and something in Dylan's eyes, hunger, maybe truth, made her take his hand. He pulled her to the dance floor, one hand on her hip, the other guiding her close. Their bodies moved in sync, her dress swaying, his fingers firm through the linen. The lanterns cast golden shadows, the trumpets' wails syncing with their steps. "Your trouble, Ashford," she murmured, her lips near his ear, the heat of him making her dizzy. He chuckled, his breath grazing her cheek, smelling of bourbon and salt. "And you're a wildfire, St. Clair. I'm just trying to keep up." The song slowed their movements tighter, and his hand slid lower, resting just above her hip. The world narrowed to the blues, the lanterns, the way his eyes burned into hers. She was ready to lean in to taste the bourbon on his lips, when a voice sliced through the music like a shard of glass. "Well, ain't this a sight?" Blakely froze, turning to see Vanessa Reed leaning against a table, her gold dress glinting, her smirk sharper than a gullah oyster knife. Vanessa Ashford, Lux's PR director, had been at the Memphis press conference, her eyes always watching, calculating. Now her gaze raked over Blakely, dripping with disdain, before settling on Dylan with a sugary smile. "Didn't peg you for slumming it, Dylan," she said, tossing her hair. "Thought you had better taste." Dylan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed cold, measured. "Walk away, Vanessa. This ain't your business." Vanessa laughed, stepping closer, her heels clicking. "Oh, it's my business. When Ashford Lux's CEO gets cozy with a reporter who'd sell him out for a headline. Tell him Blakely how you were." Mark's little side piece, begging him to stay while he laughed. The words hit like a slap, dragging up every night Blakely had cried over Mark's betrayal, her hands clenched, fury rising. But before she could speak, Dylan stepped between them, his presence a wall. "You don't know a damn thing about her," he said, his voice low, lethal. "Get out, Vanessa." Now Vanessa's smirk didn't falter, but she backed off, her eyes lingering on Blakely. "You'll crash and burn, sweetheart," she said, then sauntered away, her laughter swallowed by the blues. Blakely's chest heaved, her breath shallow. The crowd's chatter, the trumpet's wail, the harbor's distant hum, it all roared in her ears. Dylan turned to her, his hand gentle on her arm. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. She nodded, but it was a lie. Vanessa's words had ripped open a wound, and worse, they'd planted a seed of doubt. Was Dylan just playing her like Mark had? She pulled away, her voice tight. "I need air," she said, heading for the door. The Charleston night was cool. The cobblestones slick with a sudden drizzle, and she slipped into an alley beside the club. The shadows thick, the rain, a soft patter against her skin. Her hands shook as she leaned against a brick wall, Mark's betrayal echoing. "You were never enough." Footsteps splashed behind her and she spun, ready to snap, but it was Dylan. His shirt clung to him damp from the rain, his eyes fierce but soft under the glow of a nearby lantern. "Blakely," he said, stepping closer, his voice steady. "Don't let her get in your head." "She's nothing." "She's right," Blakely whispered, her voice breaking, her gullah accent thick with pain. "I was nothing to Mark. He played me, Dylan, and I let him. What if I'm just a fool again? Stop!" Dylan closed the distance, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs brushing the rain from her cheeks. The lantern flickered gold, amber gold, casting shadows across his jaw. "You're everything. You hear me? You're fire, Blakely. You're the damn sea. And I see you." His words shattered her, and when he kissed her, it was a tidal wave. His lips were hot, urgent tasting of bourbon and rain. Her hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. The brick rough against her back. The rain soaked her dress, her dreadlocks heavy, the water streaming down her skin as she arched into him. His mouth trailed to her jaw, her neck, each kiss a spark, his hands sliding to her waist, fingers digging into the wet linen. The blues pulsed faintly from the club. The rain's patter a heartbeat. The lantern's glow flashing like a storm. His hand grazed her thigh, lifting the hem of her dress. The rain cool against her skin. But he paused, his forehead resting against hers. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice a growl, his breath ragged. "Don't." She whispered her voice, sure her eyes locked on his. She kissed him again deeper, her fingers tangling in his wet hair, the world fading to the heat of his touch, the rain's rhythm, the lantern's golden haze. They didn't cross the final line, but the intimacy, the way he held her, the way she burned for him was a vow, a truth she couldn't deny. But then a flash lit the alley, sharp and blinding. Blakely pulled back, her heart lurching. Vanessa stood at the alley's mouth. Her phone raised a smirk, twisting her lips. "Smile, St. Clair," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. "This'll look great on the Tribune's front page." Dylan stepped forward, his body shielding Blakely. "Get the hell out, Vanessa," he said, his voice lethal. Vanessa laughed but backed off her heels, splashing through the rain, her threat hanging heavy. Blakely's pulse raced, fear and fury surging. "She's gonna ruin me," she said, her voice trembling. "My job, my name, everything." Dylan took her hand, his grip firm, grounding. "Let her try," he said, his eyes blazing. "I'm not letting anyone touch you, Blakely. Not now. Not ever." The rain fell harder. The blues wailed from the club, and Blakely felt the storm inside her grow. Vanessa's photo was a weapon, and worse, she'd mentioned Mark. Her ex was out there, a ghost from her past, and now he was tied to Vanessa's game. Her phone buzzed in her purse and she glanced at the screen, her blood running cold. A text from an unknown number. "You can't run from me, Blakely. You're still mine. Mark." She looked at Dylan, his profile sharp against the lantern light, his hand still holding hers. The Mississippi's tide whispered beyond the harbor, and for a moment she felt the pull of something bigger, something worth fighting for. But as the rain soaked through her dress and the blues faded, she knew the battle was just beginning. The Asheville dusk painted the Blue Ridge Mountains in hues of amber and violet, the air crisp with the scent of pine and the faint smoke of wood fires from cozy taverns. In a rustic art gallery nestled in the River Arts District, fairy lights twinkled above exposed brick walls, and the low hum of a guitar drifted through the crowd. "Blakely, sing." Claire stood by a canvas splashed with bold colors, her emerald green dress catching the light, the silk shimmering against her mahogany skin. Her dreadlocks adorned with silver beads framed her sharp cheekbones, and her deep brown eyes held a storm of fire and doubt. The guitar's mournful notes curled around her, a reminder of the blues that had carried her through Charleston's rain-soaked night. But her heart was caught in a different rhythm, one set by a man who refused to let her run, Dylan Ashford. A week had passed since Charleston, since that rain-drenched kiss in the alley, since Vanessa Reed's camera flash had threatened to torch Blakely's career. That night, under the golden glow of lanterns, Dylan's lips had burned away her doubts. But Vanessa's photo and Mark's chilling text, "You're still mine," had ripped open old wounds. Blakely had fled the blues club, determined to keep her distance, but Dylan wasn't the kind to back down. He'd tracked her to Asheville, where she'd come to chase a lead on Ashford Lux's shady land deal, now tangled with Vanessa's schemes and Mark's shadow. The memory of Dylan's hands, his voice vowing to protect her, lingered like the Charleston rain on her skin. But trust was a gamble she wasn't sure she could make. The gallery buzzed with artists, investors, and Asheville's eclectic elite, their chatter mingling with the clink of wine glasses. Blakely was here for work, digging into whispers of Ashford Lux's involvement in a questionable development project. But her focus faltered. Nia Brooks, her best friend, had warned her over the phone. "Girl, Dylan's trouble. But he's got you shook. Be careful." Blakely sipped her Merlot, the tart bite grounding her when a familiar voice slid through the music like a spark. "Still running, Sinclair." She turned, her heart lurching. Dylan stood there, his charcoal blazer open, his white shirt clinging to his frame, the faint stubble on his jaw, catching the fairy lights, his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers, a slow, dangerous smile curving his lips. The scent of cedar cologne and mountain air followed him, pulling her back to that alley, to the rain and the fire. "Damn Ashford," she said, her voice cool, but her pulse racing, her Gullah accent threading through. "You got a sixth sense for finding me, or you just stalking now?" He chuckled, stepping closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned against the wall. "Call it instinct," he said, his voice low, teasing. "Or maybe I just can't stay away from a woman who leaves me in the dust." She raised a brow, her smile sharp, but her stomach fluttering. "Takes more than a pretty face to keep up with me, Ashford. What you doing in Asheville?" He sipped his whiskey, his gaze never leaving hers. "Business, and maybe looking for a certain reporter who thinks she can outrun me." Blakely laughed, the sound rich and unapologetic, but her nerves hummed. She'd come to Asheville to uncover dirt on Ashford Lux, and Dylan's presence was a complication she didn't need. Before she could fire back, the gallery's host announced an art auction and the crowd shifted toward the stage. Dylan extended his hand, a challenge in his eyes. "Join me," he said. Not a question, but a dare. She hesitated, the guitar's mournful strum tugging at her. The last time she'd let him close, she'd nearly lost herself. But his hand was warm, his smile daring her to step into the fire, and she took it, letting him lead her to a table near the stage. The auction began, paintings and sculptures fetching high bids. But Blakely's focus was on Dylan, his easy confidence, the way his fingers brushed hers, the heat in his gaze. She teased him about his boring blazer. He countered with her reckless reporting, their banter a dance as sharp as the blues. The auctioneer presented a rare Gullah-inspired canvas, its vibrant swirls evoking the Low Country's tides. Blakely's breath caught memories of her grandmother's sweetgrass baskets flooding back. The bidding started at $10,000, and she watched, her heart heavy, knowing she couldn't afford it. Then Dylan raised his paddle, his voice cutting through the room. 50,000, the crowd gasped, heads turning. Blakely's eyes widened, her voice low. What the hell you doing, Ashford? He leaned in, his breath grazing her ear, smelling of whiskey and pine. Buying a piece of your world, St. Clair. The gavel fell, the painting his, and the crowd applauded. But Blakely's chest tightened. She didn't know if it was a gesture or a power play, and before she could decide, a voice shattered the moment like glass. Well, ain't this sweet? Her blood ran cold. Mark stood at the gallery's entrance, his denim jacket rumpled, his eyes bloodshot and wild. The room stilled, the guitar faltering. He locked onto Blakely, his voice slurring but venomous. There you are. You damn failure, he shouted, staggering forward. Think you can run off with some rich boy and forget me? You're nothing, Blakely. Nothing. Her heart pounded, shame and fury warring inside her. The crowd stared their whispers, a knife in her chest. Mark's betrayal, his lies, his greed flooded back, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Dylan was faster, stepping between them, his body a shield. You don't get to talk to her like that, he said, his voice low, lethal. Not now. Not ever. Mark sneered, swaying. Oh, you, her knight now. She's a nobody, man. Couldn't keep me. Dylan's fist connected with Mark's jaw, a sharp crack that sent him sprawling to the floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Dylan didn't flinch, his eyes blazing. She's everything you'll never be, he said, his voice steady, ringing with truth. He turned to Blakely, his arm around her. You're with me, St. Clair. Always. The room buzzed, but Blakely barely heard it. Her chest heaved, tears burning not from sadness, but from the weight of Dylan's words, the way he saw her when she couldn't see herself. Security dragged Mark out, his curses fading, but the damage was done. The stares, the whispers, they cut deep, and her legs trembled. I can't do this, she said, pulling away, her voice raw. She fled through a side door out into the Asheville night, the mountain air cool against her skin. The Blue Ridge loomed, stars glittering above, and Blakely sank onto a grassy knoll, her dress pooling around her, the fairy lights of the gallery, distant Mark's words. You're nothing clawed at her, mingling with Vanessa's threats, her own fears. She'd fought to be more than her past, to carry her Gullah pride. But what if she was just a fool falling for another man who'd burn her? The grass was soft beneath her, the pine scent grounding, but her heart raced, lost in the storm. Footsteps crunched on the path, and she looked up to see Dylan, his blazer gone, his shirt untucked, his face etched with worry. Blakely, he said, kneeling beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I'm here. You don't have to face this alone. She shook her head, her voice raw, her Gullah accent thick. He's right, Dylan. I was nothing to him. I gave him everything, and he broke me. What if I'm just setting myself up to crash again? You're everything, Dylan said, cutting her off, his voice fierce. He pulled her to her feet, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. The starlight filtered through the pines, silver light dancing across her skin, her dreadlocks gleaming like a crown. You're fire, Blakely. You're the damn tide. and I'm not letting you doubt that." He kissed her hard and desperate, his lips claiming hers under the mountain sky. The air was crisp, scented with pine and earth. The distant guitar a soft hum as their breaths synced. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her against him, the silk of her dress rustling as she arched into him. The kiss softened his mouth, trailing to her neck, her collarbone, each touch a vow. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, feeling the heat through his shirt, and when he eased her down to the grass, the cool blades pressed against her back. The world spun, the starlight bathed them cool and silver as his hands roamed her sides, tracing the curve of her ribs. Her dress slid up, exposing her thigh, and his fingers grazed her skin, sending a shiver through her. The rustle of leaves, the distant ripple of a stream, the thud of their hearts. It was a symphony, slow and deliberate. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice rough, his lips hovering over hers. "Don't." She said, her voice steady, her eyes locked on his. She pulled him closer, their bodies molding together, the grass soft beneath her. His kiss was a promise, his touch, a fire that chased away her ghosts. They didn't cross the final line. Not here, not yet. But the intimacy, the way he held her like she was his world, was enough to make her feel alive. But as they lay there, catching their breath, her phone buzzed in her purse, a sharp intrusion. She pulled it out, her heart sinking. An email from an unknown address with a grainy video, her and Mark outside a Memphis bar months ago. Her voice distorted to sound like she was pleading. The caption read, "She's playing you. Ashford. She's still his." Her blood ran cold. Vanessa. It had to be. And worse, a woman's silhouette appeared on the path, sharp against the gallery's lights. Dylan. Eleanor. Ashford called, her voice cold, commanding. "We need to talk about her." Dylan helped Blakely up, his hand firm in hers, but his eyes flickered with doubt. "What's this about Mother?" he asked, his voice tight. Eleanor stepped closer, her gaze cutting to Blakely. "Your reporter's got secrets," she said, holding up her phone, the same video glowing. "You sure she's worth your empire?" Blakely's heart pounded, fear and anger surging. Vanessa's game was escalating. Mark's shadow loomed, and now Eleanor was drawing a line. She looked at Dylan, his face torn between trust and uncertainty, and felt the mountain air grow heavy. The pines whispered. The stars watched, and in that moment, she knew the storm was far from over. The Atlanta skyline glittered like a constellation of steel and glass, its lights casting a kaleidoscope of color across the humid night. In a midtown jazz club, the air was thick with the smoky scent of bourbon, the sweet tang of magnolia blossoms drifting from open windows, and the sultry wail of a saxophone weaving through the crowd. Blakely St. Clair leaned against a high-top table, her navy silk dress shimmering under the club's dim lights, the fabric hugging her curves. Her dreadlocks, woven with silver beads, caught the glow of neon signs, and her deep brown eyes burned with a mix of determination and doubt. The saxophone's notes curled around her, a reminder of the blues that had carried her through Memphis and Charleston. But tonight her heart was caught in a new rhythm, one sparked by a man who'd fought for her under Asheville's stars. Dylan Ashford. 3 days had passed since that night in the Blue Ridge Mountains, since Mark's venomous words had torn open old wounds, since Dylan's fist had sent him sprawling, and since Eleanor Ashford's cold accusation, backed by Vanessa Reed's doctored video, had planted doubt in Dylan's eyes. That starry moment on the grassy knoll where Dylan's kiss had chased away Blakely's ghosts had been shattered by the grainy footage of her and Mark twisted to make her look like a liar. Eleanor's voice still echoed. "You sure she's worth your empire?" Blakely had fled Asheville, leaving her sweetgrass necklace on Dylan's hotel bed, determined to uncover the truth behind Vanessa's schemes. But Dylan wasn't the kind to let her go. He'd followed her to Atlanta, where she was chasing a lead on Ashford Lux's shady land deal, now tangled with Vanessa Mark, and a deeper conspiracy. The jazz club pulsed with life. Atlanta's urban elite artists, entrepreneurs, and activists swaying to the music Blakely was here to meet Jada Reed, Vanessa's younger sister, and a Memphis Tribune assistant, who'd hinted at evidence that could expose Vanessa's lies. But her mind kept drifting to Dylan, to the way his hands had felt on her skin, his vow to stand by her, and the flicker of doubt in his eyes when he saw that video. Nia Brooks, her best friend, had called earlier, her voice sharp. "Girl, Dylan's fighting for you, but you gotta decide if you're fighting for him. Don't let Mark's ghost win." Blakely sipped her gin and tonic, the citrus bite grounding her when a familiar voice cut through the saxophone's wail like a spark. "Still trying to outrun me? St. Clair?" She turned, her heart lurching. Dylan stood there, his black shirt open at the collar. His dark brown hair tousled, his gray-blue eyes locking onto hers with a mix of regret and resolve. The neon signs outside cast a green glow across his sharp jaw, and the scent of cedar cologne mingled with the club's smoky air, pulling her back to that Asheville night. "Damn Ashford," she said, her voice cool, but her pulse racing, her Gullah accent thick. "You got a knack for showing up where you ain't invited," he chuckled, stepping closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned against the table. "Maybe I'm just drawn to trouble," he said, his voice low, teasing. "Or maybe I owe you an apology for letting that video get in my head." Her eyes narrowed, but her heart softened at the sincerity in his gaze. "You think sorry fixes it, Ashford?" You looked at me like I was still Mark's. He flinched, his jaw tightening, but his voice stayed steady. "I was wrong, Blakely. I've got scars of my own. A woman who used me, sold my secrets to the highest bidder. But you're not her. You're real, and I'm not letting you go." Her chest tightened, torn between anger and the pull of his words. The saxophone wailed its notes, a slow, mournful pulse, and for a moment, she saw the man who'd fought for her in Asheville, who'd bid on a Gullah canvas, just to touch her world. But before she could respond, Jada slipped through the crowd, her eyes wide with urgency. "Blakely," she whispered, glancing nervously at Dylan. "I got something you need to see." Jada handed her a USB drive, her voice low. "Emails. Vanessa's been working with your ex, Mark, to sabotage Ashford Lux. She faked that video to break you two. I'm sorry I helped her at first, but I'm done being her pawn." Blakely's heart raced, her fingers tightening around the drive. "Why now?" "Jada," she asked, her voice steady but searching. "Why help me?" Jada swallowed her hands, twisting. "Because you're fighting for something real. Vanessa's jealous of your strength, your heart. I want out. Blakely, I want to be free." Dylan's hand brushed Blakely's, a silent anchor. "Thank you, Jada," he said, his voice firm. "If Vanessa's got more coming, we'll handle it." Jada nodded, slipping back into the crowd, leaving Blakely reeling. The USB drive burned in her hand, proof that Vanessa and Mark were a hurricane, and Dylan was their target as much as she was. She looked at him, his eyes pleading, and felt the cage of her past loosen. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand, his grip warm and sure. "Let's talk somewhere private." He led her through the club, out a side door to a rooftop overlooking Atlanta's skyline. The city lights sparkled, the air warm with magnolia and the faint hum of traffic below. A single string of fairy lights draped along the railing, casting a soft green glow. Dylan closed the door, the saxophone's wail fading to a distant pulse, and turned to her, his eyes burning. "I don't deserve you, Blakely," he said, his voice low, raw. "But I'm asking for a chance to make this right." Her throat tightened, emotions swirling fear. Want, hope. She stepped closer, the silk of her dress brushing his shirt. "You hurt me, Ashford." she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "But I'm here. Don't make me regret it." He didn't answer with words. He kissed her slow and searing, his lips tasting of whiskey and salt. The fairy lights flickered their green glow, dancing across her skin, her dreadlocks glinting as she tilted her head, deepening the kiss. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her against him, the silk falling open to reveal the curve of her collarbone. Her fingers traced his chest, feeling the heat through his shirt, and when he lifted her onto a cushioned bench, the wood creaked under her weight. The skyline sparkled, the saxophone's rhythm syncing with their breaths. The magnolia scent, a soft undercurrent. His mouth trailed to her neck, her pulse jumping under his lips, and his hands roamed her sides, slipping under her dress to graze her skin. The touch was electric, her body arching into him, the silk sliding off her shoulders. The city's hum faded, replaced by the soft rustle of fabric, the fairy light's warmth, the way his fingers dug into her hips. "You're my truth, Blakely," he whispered, his voice a growl, his lips brushing her ear, the scent of magnolia and whiskey wrapping around them. She pulled him closer, her hands tangling in his hair, her breath hitching. "Prove it," she said, her voice steady, a challenge and a plea. They didn't cross the final line, but the intimacy, the way his touch claimed her, the way her body responded was a vow, a spark that burned brighter than Atlanta's skyline. The fairy lights glowed, the saxophone sang, and for a moment Blakely felt whole. But the storm wasn't over. As they caught their breath, a sharp voice cut through the night. Dylan, Eleanor Ashford, stood at the rooftop door, her tailored coat stark against the city lights, her eyes cold as she glared at Blakely. "This ends now," she said, her voice icy. "She's a liability. I've seen the video, and I won't let her drag our name through the mud." Dylan stood his arm around Blakely, his voice lethal. "She's not a liability, Mother. She's my choice. Back off." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Blakely, her lips pursing. "You think you can play in our world? Miss St. Clair, I'll ruin you before you ruin him." Blakely's heart pounded, but she held her ground, her voice steady, her gullah accent sharp. "I don't play, Mrs. Ashford. I fight. And I ain't afraid of you." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Blakely's phone buzzed a new message, lighting the screen. From Malik. "Turner, her colleague. Vanessa's spreading lies about you at the Tribune. She says you're using Dylan for a story. Watch your back." Her stomach twisted, the weight of Vanessa's schemes, Mark's threats, and Eleanor's disdain crashing over her. She looked at Dylan, his face torn between fury and fear, and felt the skyline's pulse grow heavy. The magnolia-scented air thickened, the saxophone wailed, and Blakely knew the battle was far from won. The Atlanta night blazed with the glow of 1,000 lights, the skyline a glittering tapestry of steel and ambition. Inside the grand ballroom of the Ashford Lux Hotel, chandeliers cast prisms of light across marble floors, the air heavy with the scent of orchids, champagne, and the faint hum of a jazz quartet saxophone. Blakely St. Clair stood at the edge of the gala, her gold silk gown shimmering like molten sunlight against her mahogany skin. Her dreadlocks woven with silver beads caught the chandelier's glow, and her deep brown eyes burned with a fierce resolve. The jazz pulsed a sultry heartbeat, but her heart was a wildfire, fueled by the truth she was about to unleash. Dylan Ashford. A week had passed since that rooftop in Atlanta, since Jada Reed's USB drive had exposed Vanessa's lies, since Dylan's kiss had burned away Blakely's doubts, and since Eleanor Ashford's icy threat, "I'll ruin you," had drawn a line in the sand. That night under the fairy lights, Dylan had vowed to fight for her, but Vanessa's schemes, Mark's shadow and Eleanor's disdain had tightened the noose. Blakely had spent days digging the USB drive, revealing emails that tied Vanessa to Mark and a rival hotel chain plotting to sabotage Ashford Lux. Tonight at the gala, she'd expose the truth, risking her career, her heart and her place in Dylan's world. Nia Brooks, her best friend, had texted earlier, her voice sharp. "Girl, you're a damn queen. Burn it down, but don't let them dim your light." The ballroom buzzed with Atlanta's elite moguls, politicians and influencers sipping champagne, their laughter mingling with the jazz. Blakely clutched a flash drive in her purse, her plan set. She'd convinced the gala's tech team to play a video exposing Vanessa's emails during a break, but her nerves hummed the weight of her past. Mark's betrayal, her fear of trust clashing with the fire Dylan had ignited. She scanned the crowd, spotting Dylan near the stage, his black tuxedo tailored to perfection, his dark brown hair swept back, his gray-blue eyes finding hers across the room. His smile, soft but fierce, sent a spark through her, but before she could move, a cold voice slithered through the music. "Look at you playing princess." Vanessa Reed said, her silver gown glinting, her smirk sharp as a blade. "You think you can waltz in here and take Dylan? You're out of your league, St. Clair." Blakely's jaw tightened, her gullah accent sharp. "I ain't here to play Vanessa. I'm here to end you." Vanessa laughed, stepping closer, her perfume sharp with citrus. "Keep dreaming that video you think you have. It's nothing compared to what I've got on you. Mark's ready to spill, and when he does, Dylan'll see you for the fraud you are." Blakely's heart pounded, but she held her ground, her voice steady. "You're grasping, Vanessa, and you're about to fall." The jazz quartet paused, and the gala's host took the mic, announcing a special presentation. Blakely's pulse raced as the lights dimmed, the massive screen flickering to life. The crowd hushed, and Vanessa's voice filled the room, smug and sharp. "Blakely's nothing. I faked that video, cropped it, dubbed it. She'll crash, and Dylan's mine." The emails flashed next, detailing her plot with Mark, and the rival chain. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by outraged murmurs. Blakely stood tall, Dylan's hand finding hers, his grip firm, his eyes blazing with pride. The screen went dark, and the host, visibly shaken, condemned Vanessa's actions, announcing her immediate dismissal from Ashford Lux. The crowd erupted in applause, but Blakely's eyes locked on Vanessa, her face pale, her silver gown stark against the ballroom's glow. She turned to flee, but a shout cut through the chaos, raw and furious. "Blakely!" Mark staggered into the ballroom, his denim jacket soaked with sweat, his eyes wild with liquor and rage. The crowd froze, the saxophone silent. He pointed at her, his voice slurring. "You think you can ruin me? You're mine. St. Clair, and I'll drag you down with me." Her heart hammered memories of Mark's betrayal, his lies, his greed flooding back. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the night like a gullah oyster knife. "I ain't yours, Mark. I never was. I'm Blakely St. Clair, and I'm free." Mark lunged, his fist raised, but Dylan was faster, grabbing his arm and twisting it back. "Touch her and you're done." Dylan growled, his voice lethal. "Malik Turner." Blakely's colleague stepped in, his eyes fierce. "Back off, man," he said, his voice steady, his usual shyness gone. "She's worth more than you'll ever know." Security swarmed, dragging Mark away, his curses swallowed by the jazz quartet's sudden resumption. The crowd cheered, but Blakely's legs trembled, the weight of the moment crashing over her. Dylan pulled her into his arms, his breath hot against her hair, his cedar cologne grounding her. "You did it, Blakely," he said, his voice thick with pride. "You're unstoppable." The saxophone wailed a triumphant note, and the gala roared back to life. Blakely clung to Dylan, her face buried in his chest, the chandelier light warm on her skin. She felt the tide shift, the cage of her past shattering. But then a soft, measured voice called her name, cutting through the music. Ms. St. Clair Eleanor Ashford stood at the edge of the crowd, her silver hair gleaming, her eyes softer than Blakely had ever seen. The jazz faded as Eleanor stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly. "I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "I judged you pushed you away because I was afraid. Years ago I gave up love for duty for this family's name. I won't let Dylan make that mistake." Blakely's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. "Mrs. Ashford," she whispered the word heavy with unspoken pain. Eleanor reached for her hand, a tentative gesture, and Blakely took it, the crowd blurring around them. Thomas Ashford, Dylan's father, appeared behind Eleanor, his face lined with quiet pride. "You're our daughter's strength," he said, his voice rough. "You've always been enough." The weight of their words, their acceptance, lifted a burden Blakely hadn't known she carried. She turned to Dylan, his smile radiant, and felt a new fire bloom inside her. But the night held one more surprise. Malik approached, his eyes sheepish but warm. "Blakely," he said, clearing his throat. "I was wrong to push my feelings on you. I see you now with him. You're where you belong." She nodded, her smile soft but genuine. "We're good, Malik. Always will be." Jada Reed slipped through the crowd, her face bright with relief. "I'm free. Blakely," she said, her voice trembling. "Vanessa's gone, and I'm done hiding. Thank you for showing me I can fight." The gala pulsed, the jazz soaring, and Blakely felt truly free for the first time. But the night wasn't over. Dylan took her hand, his eyes glinting with a secret. "Come with me," he said, leading her through a side door to a private suite overlooking the skyline. The room glowed with the candlelight, the air warm with the scent of orchids and wax, the city's hum, a faint echo. Dylan closed the door. His gaze locked on hers, and the world fell away. "You were incredible tonight," he said, stepping closer, his voice a low rumble. He brushed a silver bead from her dreadlocks, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You're my fire, Blakely." She smiled, her heart racing, and tugged him closer by his tuxedo lapel. "Show me," she said, her voice husky, a challenge. He kissed her slow at first, his lips soft but insistent, tasting of champagne and salt. The candles flickered their golden light, dancing across her skin as she unbuttoned his shirt, her fingers tracing the warmth of his chest. His hands slid to her waist, lifting her gown, the silk, whispering as it fell to the floor. The jazz quartet's saxophone drifted through the window, a sultry backdrop to their breaths. His mouth trailed to her neck, her pulse jumping under his lips, and his fingers grazed her thighs, sending shivers through her. The room spun the candles, casting shadows that moved with them, the orchid scent mingling with wax. "You're everything," he whispered, his voice rough, his hands firm but reverent. She arched into him, her body alive, her fears melting in the heat of his touch. They didn't cross the final line, not yet. But the intimacy, the way his eyes held hers, was a vow deeper than words. The candles burned low. The jazz faded, and as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Blakely felt a peace she'd never known. But as the skyline twinkled outside, Dylan sat up, his expression shifting. "Blakely," he said, his voice soft, but serious. "There's something I want to show you tomorrow on the Memphis riverbank. It's important." She propped herself on her elbow, her silver beads clicking softly. "What is it, Ashford?" He smiled, a glint of mystery in his eyes. "A surprise," he said, kissing her forehead. "Something to show you what you mean to me." Her heart fluttered, curiosity and hope swirling. The jazz echoed in the distance. The skyline pulsed, and Blakely knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The cage was gone. The tide was hers, and with Dylan by her side, she could face anything. The Memphis riverfront glowed under a fiery sunset, the Mississippi's waves lapping gently against the sandy shore, their rhythm a soft echo of the city's blues. The air was thick with the briny scent of the river, the sweet perfume of honeysuckle from nearby gardens, and the distant wail of a saxophone drifting from Beale Street. Blakely. St. Clair stood barefoot on the sand, her white lace gown flowing like a tide, its intricate patterns shimmering against her mahogany skin. Her dreadlocks adorned with tiny pearl beads caught the sunset's light, a crown of resilience and pride. Her deep brown eyes sparkled with a joy she'd once thought impossible, her heart a wildfire finally at peace. Tonight she wasn't just a St. Clair bound by pain or duty. She was Blakely, free and whole, standing on the edge of forever. Dylan Ashford. A week had passed since the Atlanta gala, since Blakely had exposed Vanessa Reed's lies, faced down Mark's rage, and found peace with Eleanor and Thomas Ashford. That night, under the chandelier's golden glow, she'd shattered the cage of her past, her gullah strength carrying her through Dylan's vow. "You're my fire." Blakely had anchored her, and his cryptic promise of a surprise on the Memphis riverbank had kept her heart racing. She'd driven to this quiet stretch of the Mississippi, at his request her sandals dangling from her hand. The sand cool beneath her toes. The sunset painted the sky in coral and gold, and as she walked, the river's tide whispered her name. A call to the future she'd fought for. Dylan stood by the water's edge, his linen shirt unbuttoned, his dark brown hair tousled by the river breeze, his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers, a smile spreading across his face, soft, steady, and full of unspoken love. Behind him, a driftwood arch draped with white cloth swayed gently, its base adorned with woven gullah sweetgrass baskets and pearl-studded shells. A single lantern hung from the arch, its golden light flickering like a star. Blakely's breath caught her heart stuttering as she realized what this was. "Dylan," she said, her voice trembling, her gullah accent threading through. "What you up to now?" He stepped forward, taking her hands, his fingers warm and sure. The sunset cast a halo around him, the river's waves singing as if in blessing. "Blakely, St. Clair," he said, his voice low, resonant. "You've turned my world upside down. You're my fire, my tide, my truth. I don't want another day without you by my side." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. The crowd there was none, just the two of them, the river and the sky, but the moment felt eternal. He opened the box, revealing a pearl ring, its luster glowing like the moon. "I saw you that first night on Beale Street," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "and I knew you were different. You fought for your truth, Blakely, and you made me fight for something real. Marry me. Be my forever." Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain, but from a joy so fierce it stole her breath. The waves crashed, the lantern flickered, and she laughed, the sound bright and unbroken. "You making it real hard to say no." "Ashford," she said, her voice trembling with love. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his grin boyish, hopeful. She nodded, her voice soft but sure. "Yes, Dylan. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, its cool pearl, a perfect fit, and stood pulling her into his arms. His lips found hers, the kiss deep and lingering tasting of salt and honeysuckle. Her hand slid up his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart, and she pressed closer, the lace of her gown whispering against his shirt. The sunset bathed them in gold, the river's song rising, and for a moment, the world was theirs alone. The wedding took place a week later on the same Memphis riverfront, transformed into a celebration of love and gullah heritage. Sweetgrass baskets lined the aisle, their intricate weaves glowing under strings of lanterns. Tables brimmed with red rice, shrimp and grits and okra stew, the air rich with the scents of soul food and river mist. A blues band played near brooks, leading with a soulful gullah spiritual, her voice weaving through the warm night. Blakely stood at the altar, her white lace gown a vision of elegance, pearl beads woven into her dreadlocks like a constellation. Her mahogany skin glowed, her brown eyes locked on Dylan, who waited under the driftwood arch, his linen suit sharp and timeless. He looked at her like she was the only star in the sky, his gray-blue eyes shining with devotion. "You're a damn dream," he murmured as she reached him, his voice thick with awe. "You ain't so bad yourself, Ashford," she teased, her smile radiant. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining the pearl ring, catching the lantern light. The ceremony was simple, but profound. The river and sky their witnesses. Nia's band played softly, the waves a gentle chorus. Blakely's parents, long estranged but invited by Dylan, sat in the front row, their faces soft with pride. Eleanor and Thomas Ashford, now reconciled, held hands. Eleanor's earlier disdain replaced by quiet respect. Malik Turner stood as a groomsman, his smile warm, his earlier feelings for Blakely transformed into friendship. Jada Reed, free from Vanessa's shadow, beamed from the crowd, her new role at the Tribune, a testament to her courage. The officiant. A Gullah elder spoke of love as a tide, ever moving, ever enduring. Dylan's vows came first, his voice steady over the waves. "Blakely, you're my ocean. I promise to love you, to fight for you, to sail every storm with you. You're my whole world." Blakely's voice trembled, but held firm. "Dylan, you gave me truth, a love I never thought I'd find. I promise to stand by you, to be your fire, your home forever. They exchanged rings. Hers the pearl, his a silver band etched with a wave. And when Dylan kissed her, the crowd erupted, the blues band soaring into a triumphant melody. Her lips were warm, tasting of honeysuckle and salt, and she clung to him, the world spinning. The waves crashed, the lanterns glowed, and Blakely knew this was her harbor, her eternity. But amidst the joy, a shadow lingered. From the riverbank's edge, Mark watched his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He'd returned to Memphis, drawn by whispers of Blakely's wedding, his heart twisted with regret. He saw her in Dylan's arms, her smile brighter than he'd ever known, and memories flooded him. Nights he'd chosen greed over love, lies he'd spun to break her. Now, with Vanessa disgraced and his life in ruins, he realized too late what he'd lost. He stepped forward, wanting to speak, to beg forgiveness, but Dylan's gaze met his, sharp and unyielding, a tide ready to sweep him away. Mark hesitated, then turned his boots, sinking into the sand, carrying his regrets into the night. As the reception unfolded, Blakely and Dylan danced under the stars, the blues band's rhythm wrapping around them. His hand rested on her waist, his fingers warm through the lace, and she leaned into him, her cheek against his chest. "You happy?" he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "Happier than I ever dreamed," she said, her voice soft, her eyes shining. The crowd faded, the music a heartbeat, and they swayed, bound by a love that had weathered every storm. Later, in a private bungalow overlooking the river, the world was theirs alone. The room glowed with moonlight, its silver beams casting shadows across the walls. Blakely stood by the window, her lace gown replaced by a silk slip, its ivory fabric clinging to her curves. The air was warm, scented with river mist and cedar, the distant blues a faint echo. Dylan stepped behind her, his hands settling on her hips, his breath hot against her neck. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his voice a husky whisper. "You're making it real hard to behave." She turned in his arms, her hands sliding up his chest, unbuttoning his shirt with deliberate slowness. "Who said I want you to behave?" she teased, her eyes locked on his, the moonlight dancing in her gaze. The silk slip shifted under his fingers, the fabric whispering, and she pressed closer, her body molding to his. His lips claimed hers, slow and deep, tasting of champagne and promises. The moonlight flickered, the waves murmured, and his hands roamed her back, tracing her spine, each touch, a vow. His lips trailed down her neck, leaving a path of heat, and she arched into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Blakely," he whispered, his voice a mix of need and reverence, and she answered with a kiss that stole his breath, her body alive under his touch. The silk slipped lower, the moonlight soft on her skin, and they moved together. The bungalow, a cocoon of warmth and love. It wasn't just passion, it was trust, a bond forged through battles, a love that set her free. A year later, Blakely and Dylan lived in a riverside loft in Memphis, its walls adorned with Gullah art, its windows open to the Mississippi. Blakely led the Tribune's investigative team, her stories championing the voiceless, her laughter a melody for colleagues and readers alike. Dylan balanced Ashford Lux with mornings brewing coffee for her, their evenings spent watching sunsets from their balcony. They had a daughter, Zuri, whose bright eyes mirrored Blakely's fire, and they were planning a world cruise, a journey to explore every horizon. But Memphis remained their harbor, their home. Blakely stood on the riverbank one evening, her pearl ring glinting, her dreadlocks loose in the breeze. Dylan slipped an arm around her, his lips brushing her temple. "We did good, didn't we?" she said, her voice soft, the Mississippi stretching before them. "Better than good," he said, his smile a promise. "We did forever." She leaned into him, the waves singing, and knew she'd found her true harbor not in Memphis's sands, but in Dylan's heart. She was Blakely, Ashford, a woman who'd fought for her truth, claimed her love, and wove her Gullah pride into a life that soared. Did Blakely and Dylan's love touch your heart? Drop love in the comments if you believe in true love's power, and hit that subscribe button to join our Soul Stories family. Share this journey with friends, and let's keep spreading stories that ignite the soul.